Admiral Zextherin of the mighty Hegemony fleet stood before his command display, and honestly, he couldn't stop himself from grinning. After 40 years of conquering star systems and crushing rebellions across 3 galaxy arms, this had to be the most pathetic sight he'd ever witnessed. 12 little ships floated in the black void of space, looking about as threatening as children's toys. They were boxy, crude things that reminded him more of the cargo haulers that delivered supplies to his fleet than actual warships. His tactical officer, a 6-armed Velthin with scales that shifted colors when excited, was practically vibrating with amusement. "Admiral, my sensors show their largest vessel is barely 200 meters long. Our smallest frigate could swallow 3 of them whole." The bridge crew erupted into chittering, clicking sounds that passed for laughter among his mixed alien crew. Even the normally serious Korthan weapons specialists were making their low rumbling sounds of amusement. Zextherin's own flagship, the Eternal Dominance, stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern. It was a masterpiece of hegemony engineering, its hull gleaming with energy shields that could deflect the firepower of entire planetary defense grids. Around him, 299 other warships formed perfect geometric patterns that had been refined over thousands of years of galactic warfare. Each vessel represented centuries of technological advancement, crewed by species that had been fighting among the stars since before most civilizations had discovered fire. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, mandibles clicking with barely contained mirth, "our deep scans confirm these vessels are constructed from basic metal alloys. No composite armor, no crystalline reinforcement matrices, nothing sophisticated at all. Their power signatures suggest they're running on primitive fusion reactors that we stopped using 3,000 years ago." The Admiral nodded, studying the tactical breakdown. According to their files, these ships belonged to a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. They called themselves humans, apparently, and had been making noise about claiming territory in this sector. The Galactic Council had been debating what to do about these newcomers for months, but Zextherin had volunteered to handle the situation personally. After all, someone needed to teach these primitives how things worked in civilized space. "They probably saw our exploration probe last month and panicked," suggested his communications officer, a tall, thin Ashgary whose crystalline features sparkled with amusement. "Threw together whatever ships they could find and hoped they could scare us off through sheer audacity." Zextherin had to admit there was a certain charm to their boldness. Most species, when faced with a hegemony fleet, simply surrendered immediately or fled to the outer rim territories. These humans had actually shown up to challenge them. It was like watching a group of children challenge a professional gladiator to combat. Adorable, really. His tactical display showed the humans holding position at the edge of the disputed system, not advancing but not retreating either. Their ships were arranged in what looked like a loose formation, though it was hard to tell if it was intentional or if they simply didn't know proper military spacing. Everything about them screamed amateur hour, from their crude hull designs to their apparently random positioning. "Admiral," his sensor technician called out, "we're detecting some unusual readings from the human vessels. Their electromagnetic signatures are inconsistent with their apparent construction." Zextherin waved a dismissive hand. "Probably just their primitive systems causing interference. These young species always have trouble with proper shielding." He'd seen it countless times before. A civilization would stumble onto faster-than-light technology, get drunk on their own perceived power, and make foolish challenges they couldn't back up. Then reality would set in, usually followed by a very polite surrender and an agreement to pay tribute to hegemony for the next few centuries. The other council species representatives on his bridge were already placing bets on how quickly the humans would surrender once they realized what they were facing. The Zelanthi Observer had wagered they'd give up the moment the hegemony fleet powered up its main weapons. The Vorthag diplomat was convinced they'd run as soon as they got a proper scan of the Admiral's forces. "Shall we open communication, sir?" his communications officer asked. "Perhaps we can convince them to surrender before any unpleasantness becomes necessary." Zextherin nodded approvingly. Despite his amusement at the situation, he preferred to handle these matters diplomatically when possible. The hegemony's reputation was built on strength, but they weren't monsters. If these humans could be made to understand their position peacefully, everyone could avoid unnecessary destruction. "Open a channel," he ordered, straightening his ornate uniform. "Let's see if we can educate these children about how the galaxy really works." But as the communication array activated and connected to the lead human vessel, Admiral Zextherin had no idea that he was about to receive an education of his own. As Admiral Zextherin's massive fleet began moving toward the human vessels, the tactical situation became even more laughable. His ships glided through space in perfect formation, their advanced engines barely registering on power consumption monitors as they accelerated to intercept speed. Meanwhile, his sensor crews were having a field day analyzing the pathetic enemy force that awaited them. "Admiral, you're not going to believe this," called out his chief sensor operator, a bulky Gromax whose 4 eyes were practically bulging with disbelief. "These human ships are registering at barely 15,000 tons each. Our smallest escort frigate masses 10 times that amount. I've seen civilian pleasure craft with more impressive hulls." The bridge crew burst into fresh waves of alien laughter. Zextherin's own flagship alone massed over 12 million tons of advanced military hardware. The entire human fleet combined probably weighed less than one of the secondary gun turrets. It was like bringing a construction fleet to fight a battle group. "The hull composition is even worse," continued the sensor operator, his voice thick with amusement. "They're using basic steel and titanium alloys. No crystalline matrices. No quantum-bonded composites. Nothing we consider proper military-grade armor. These things would crumple if we sneezed at them too hard." His tactical officer pulled up detailed scans on the main display, and the entire bridge fell silent for a moment before erupting in even louder chittering. The human ships looked like someone had taken mining equipment and bolted a few weapons onto the sides. Their hulls were covered in ugly, practical-looking modules that screamed jury-rigged to anyone with military experience. "Sir," his engineering specialist reported, "their power signatures are coming from basic fusion reactors, the kind of technology we abandoned 3 millennia ago when we developed antimatter cores. According to my calculations, their entire fleet combined generates less power than our coffee machines." Zextherin shook his head in amazement. He'd fought rebels, pirates, and rogue military factions across half the galaxy, but he'd never encountered anyone desperate enough to challenge hegemony with such primitive equipment. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, probably both. "Admiral," his communications officer suggested, "perhaps we should simply destroy them quickly. It would be a mercy, really. They clearly don't understand what they're facing." But Zextherin held up a hand. Despite 4 decades of military service, he still believed in giving lesser species a chance to surrender with dignity. The hegemony's reputation was built on strength, yes, but also on fairness. These humans might be primitive, but they'd shown courage in coming here at all. That deserved at least one opportunity to avoid senseless destruction. "Open a communication channel," he ordered, straightening his ceremonial medals. "Let's see if we can talk some sense into them." The channel crackled to life, and Zextherin prepared to deliver his standard surrender demand. He'd given this speech hundreds of times before to dozens of species. Usually, the mere sight of his fleet was enough to convince any reasonable commander to stand down. He cleared his throat and began speaking in the universal trade language that all spacefaring civilizations understood. "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Zextherin of the Galactic Council Hegemony Fleet. You are clearly outmatched and outgunned. I am prepared to offer you safe passage from this system if you withdraw immediately. This is your only warning." He expected the usual response: stammering apologies, desperate pleas for mercy, or maybe just shocked silence as the reality of the situation sank in. What he got instead made him do a double take. The voice that came back was calm, almost casual, like someone discussing the weather. "Council Fleet, this is Commander Jake Wilson of the Terran Defense Force. You're trespassing in human space. Turn around now or we'll make you." The bridge fell dead silent. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed to pause. Zextherin's officers stared at each other in shock. Had this primitive just threatened them? Had he actually suggested that 12 tiny ships could force a hegemony fleet to retreat? Did he just... his tactical officer began, then trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. "He did," confirmed the communications officer, checking his equipment as if the translation might have been wrong. Zex Theron felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite identify. Part of him was insulted. How dare this backwater species threaten hegemony? Part of him was impressed by their sheer audacity. But mostly he was curious. What exactly did these humans think they could do against his armada? "Commander Wilson," he responded, keeping his voice level, "I don't think you understand the situation. You are facing 300 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Your entire fleet could fit inside one of my cargo bays. Surrender now, and I promise you and your crews will be treated with honor." The human's response came back immediately, and this time there was something in his tone that made Zex Theron's skin crawl. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was confidence. Pure, unshakable confidence. "Admiral, I think it's you who doesn't understand the situation. This is your final warning." Admiral Zex Theron was about to respond with his usual intimidation tactics when his entire worldview shattered in the span of 30 seconds. The 12 human vessels, which had been sitting motionless like floating scrap metal just moments before, suddenly burst into motion with a grace that defied every law of physics he understood. "What in the seven hells?" his tactical officer gasped, watching his displays with wide, unblinking eyes. The human ships didn't just move. They flowed. Like a school of deep space creatures responding to some invisible predator, they shifted and wove through the vacuum with impossible coordination. Their blocky, ugly hulls somehow became elegant as they danced around each other in patterns that made Zex Theron's brain hurt trying to follow. "Sir, this can't be right," his sensor operator called out, panic creeping into his voice. "According to their mass readings, those ships shouldn't be able to accelerate like that. They're pulling 12 Gs minimum, but their inertial compensators would have to be more advanced than ours to handle that kind of stress." But that was just the beginning. As Zex Theron watched in growing horror, energy readings across his tactical display began spiking to levels that shouldn't have been possible. Those primitive fusion reactors were somehow producing power signatures that rivaled his own antimatter cores. Hidden systems were coming online throughout the human fleet, systems that his deep scans had completely missed. "Admiral," his chief engineer reported, his voice shaking, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups across all 12 vessels, but the signatures don't match any known weapon systems. It's not plasma, not particle beams, not quantum torpedoes. I have no idea what they're charging up." The bridge crew fell silent, except for the urgent beeping of alert systems. Zex Theron felt a cold dread settling in his stomach as he watched those 12 tiny ships arrange themselves into a formation that suddenly looked a lot less random and a lot more threatening. "Sir, should we raise shields?" his defensive systems officer asked nervously. Before Zex Theron could answer, the lead human vessel fired. There was no brilliant flash of energy, no spectacular light show that usually accompanied space combat. Just a brief, almost invisible flicker from a human ship's bow. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then Zex Theron's world turned upside down. 3 of his finest dreadnoughts, massive warships that had served with distinction for over 2 centuries, simply ceased to exist, not exploded in balls of flame, not torn apart by energy beams. They were just gone, as if someone had reached into reality and erased them with a cosmic pencil eraser. "Report," Zex Theron shouted, his voice cracking with shock. "Sir, I don't understand what I'm seeing," his sensor operator stammered. "The glorious victory, the Iron Fist, and the Star Crusher are no longer registering on any of our instruments. There's no debris field, no energy signatures, nothing. They're just gone." His tactical officer was frantically running diagnostics on his equipment. "Admiral, my systems must be malfunctioning. According to these readings, something just passed through our formation at approximately 15% light speed. That's impossible. Nothing can accelerate matter to those velocities without creating massive energy discharges." But Zex Theron was beginning to understand, and the realization filled him with a terror he hadn't felt since his first combat mission as a young officer. "It wasn't an energy weapon," he whispered, more to himself than his crew. "Sir?" his communications officer asked. "It was a projectile." Zex Theron said louder, his mind racing to comprehend what he'd just witnessed. They fired a solid projectile at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy alone would be... He trailed off, running calculations in his head that made him feel sick. His engineering specialist completed the thought. Sir, an object moving at that velocity would hit with the force of a small star going supernova. Our shields wouldn't even slow it down. It would pass right through our hulls like they were made of paper. The bridge erupted in panic chatter as the full implication sank in. These weren't primitive ships crewed by backwards aliens who'd barely figured out space travel. These were weapons of war designed by a species that had clearly taken a completely different approach to military technology. How is this possible? His tactical officer demanded. Our intelligence reports said they'd only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. They should be centuries behind us technologically. Zex Theron stared at the tactical display, watching the remaining human ships continue their impossible dance through space. Each movement was precise, calculated, like they were following some master plan that his most advanced computers couldn't predict. We were wrong, he said quietly. We were very, very wrong. Suddenly, Commander Wilson's calm confidence made perfect sense. The humans hadn't been bluffing or hoping to intimidate their way out of a hopeless situation. They'd been trying to give the hegemony fleet a chance to leave peacefully. Now the gloves were coming off, and Admiral Zex Theron was beginning to understand that his 300 warships might not be enough. The destruction of 3 dreadnoughts was just the opening act. What happened next turned Admiral Zex Theron's carefully ordered universe into absolute chaos. As a stunned crew tried to process what they'd just witnessed, the 12 human vessels began to transform before their eyes. Sections of those blocky, ugly hulls started sliding apart like mechanical flowers blooming in fast motion. Hidden bays opened along their sides, revealing internal structures that shouldn't have been possible given their external dimensions. It was as if the humans had somehow built ships that were bigger on the inside than the outside. Admiral, we're detecting massive deployment signatures, his sensor operator called out, his voice rising with panic. Something's coming out of those ships. Lots of somethings. What emerged from the human vessels looked like angry swarms of metallic insects. Thousands upon thousands of tiny craft, each no bigger than a fighter pilot's cockpit, poured out of the human ships in perfectly coordinated streams. They moved with intelligence that made Zex Theron's skin crawl. Not like mindless drones following simple programming, but like living predators that had just caught the scent of prey. Those are autonomous attack units, his tactical officer reported, watching the scanner readings with growing horror. But, sir, the power signatures don't make sense. Each individual drone is generating enough energy to power a small cruiser. How do they fit that much technology into something so tiny? Zex Theron watched the tactical display as a human drone swarm spread out like a living cloud of death. His own fighters were massive compared to these things. Each hegemony interceptor was the size of a small building and required a crew of 3. These human drones looked like they could fit in his officers' quarters, yet somehow they were moving with coordination that his best pilots couldn't match. Sir, we need to respond, his weapons officer urged. Our fighters are launching now, but those drone swarms are already moving to engage our forward elements. The Admiral nodded grimly, but something in his gut told him this wasn't going to go the way his tactical manuals predicted. For 3,000 years, galactic warfare had followed established patterns. Fleets formed battle lines, exchanged long-range fire, then closed for decisive engagement. Fighters provided screening and harassment. Capital ships delivered the killing blows. It was all very civilized, very predictable. But these humans were rewriting the rulebook in real time. Instead of forming proper battle lines, their ships scattered in seemingly random directions, each one spewing out more drone swarms as they moved. The drones themselves weren't following any tactical formation he recognized. They flowed through space like schools of fish, constantly shifting and adapting their approach vectors. Admiral, our fighter squadrons are reporting unusual behavior from the human drones, his communications officer announced. They're not attacking in waves or following predictable patterns. Each group seemed to be making independent decisions, adapting their tactics based on our responses. That's when it hit him. These weren't just drones. They were artificial intelligences. Each tiny craft was thinking for itself while somehow coordinating with thousands of others. It was like fighting an enemy that had a brilliant tactical genius, controlling every single unit simultaneously. His forward battle group tried to respond with traditional interceptor tactics, but the human drones simply flowed around their formations like water around rocks. When his ships turned to pursue one group, 3 others would appear from different angles. When they concentrated fire on a swarm, it would scatter into individual units that were too small and fast to target effectively. "Sir, the Righteous Hammer is reporting critical damage," his communications officer called out. "The human drones are somehow penetrating their shields and targeting specific systems. They're taking out weapons arrays, sensor clusters, engine components. It's like they know exactly where to hit for maximum effect." Zex Theron watched in fascination and horror as his carefully organized fleet descended into chaos. His captains were following procedures that had worked flawlessly for millennia, but nothing was going according to plan. Every time they adapted to one human tactic, the enemy would shift to something completely different. The worst part was that the humans seemed to be anticipating his fleet's responses before they even made them. When his left wing moved to flank the nearest human ship, drones were already waiting in position to intercept. When he ordered his heavy cruisers to concentrate their fire, the human vessel simply wasn't there anymore, having moved to a new position seconds before the order was even given. "It's like they're reading our minds," his tactical officer muttered, staring at his displays in bewilderment. But Zex Theron was beginning to understand something far more terrifying. These humans weren't reading their minds. They were simply better at this than his people were. While the hegemony had spent thousands of years perfecting rigid tactical doctrines, the humans had apparently learned to think outside every box simultaneously, and his fleet was losing badly. In just 20 minutes, everything Admiral Zex Theron thought he knew about galactic warfare had been turned completely upside down. His mighty hegemony fleet, 300 of the most advanced warships ever built, now drifted through space like broken toys scattered across a child's bedroom floor. Emergency lights flickered across dozens of hulls where human drones had surgically disabled critical systems with terrifying precision. The Admiral sat slumped in his command chair, staring at damage reports that read like a complete military disaster. 47 of his ships were completely powerless, their engines and weapons offline. Another 112 were operating on emergency power only. The rest were functional but had taken enough damage that they'd need months in space dock to return to fighting condition. And the humans? All 12 of their ships were still operating at full capacity, their drone swarms having returned to their motherships like obedient pets called home for dinner. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender requests from over 60 of our captains. They're asking for permission to stand down before the humans decide to finish what they started." Zex Theron closed his eyes and tried to process what had just happened. In 4 decades of military service, he'd never seen anything like it. The humans had dismantled his fleet with surgical precision, targeting exactly what they needed to disable without causing unnecessary casualties. They could have destroyed every ship in his armada, but instead, they'd chosen to prove their point with minimal loss of life. "Admiral," his tactical officer added, "final casualty reports are coming in. We lost approximately 3,000 crew members, mostly from the ships that were completely destroyed in the opening strike. Given the scale of this engagement, those numbers are—" He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "Sir, they're impossibly low. In a normal fleet action of this size, we'd expect tens of thousands of casualties." The realization hit Zex Theron like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They'd done it while actively trying to minimize casualties. These weren't bloodthirsty conquerors looking to maximize destruction. They were warriors who understood the difference between winning a battle and committing genocide. With a heavy heart, the Admiral reached for his communications console. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Open a channel to human fleet," he ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The connection crackled to life, and Commander Wilson's calm voice filled the bridge. "Admiral Zex Theron, I hope you're not planning anything foolish. My people prefer to settle things diplomatically when possible." "Commander Wilson," Zex Theron replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am formally surrendering the Hegemony Fleet to your forces. We were clearly outmatched, and I see no point in causing further casualties among my crews." There was a moment of silence on the channel, and when Wilson spoke again, his tone had shifted to something almost apologetic. "Admiral, we're sending you our technical specifications and territorial boundary maps. Humanity doesn't want to fight with the Galactic Council, but we've learned that respect out here comes from strength. Hope this little demonstration helps us start off on the right foot." What happened next would haunt Zextheron's dreams for years to come. A data package hit his ship's computers, and as his technical staff began analyzing it, their shocked reports painted a picture that defied everything he thought he knew about technological development. "Sir," his chief engineer called out, his voice shaking with excitement and terror, "this is impossible. According to these specifications, the humans have developed fusion reactors that output more energy per unit mass than our antimatter cores. Their material science is centuries ahead of anything in the galactic database. And their computer systems." He trailed off, apparently unable to find words. "What about their computer systems?" Zextheron demanded. "Sir, they've achieved true artificial intelligence. Not just advanced programming like our tactical computers, but actual thinking machines that can learn, adapt, and make independent decisions. That's how they coordinated those drone swarms so perfectly. Each unit was essentially a small genius working in perfect harmony with thousands of others. But it wasn't just the technology that stunned the Admiral. As he read through the human territorial claims and diplomatic proposals, he began to understand something profound about these newcomers. They weren't looking to conquer the galaxy or overthrow the established order. They simply wanted to be left alone to develop their own corner of space. "Commander Wilson," Zextheron said into the comm, "if I may ask, how long has your species been capable of this level of technological development?" Wilson's chuckle came through clearly. "Admiral, we've been watching your people and the other council races for over 50 years. We knew that eventually someone would come to test us, so we spent that time preparing. While you've all been playing political games and fighting wars with thousand-year-old tactics, we've been innovating. We had to, because we knew we'd only get one chance to prove ourselves." The implications were staggering. While the great galactic powers had been content to rest on ancient achievements, humanity had been quietly revolutionizing everything from energy production to artificial intelligence. They'd watched, learned, and built something entirely new, while everyone else assumed they were primitive newcomers. "We hope this can be the beginning of peaceful relations between our peoples," Wilson continued. "But make sure the Council understands. Humanity isn't asking for permission to exist out here. We're simply letting you know we're here to stay.